Hello everyone, today I'm here recording a video for GTOBase. I'm not going to dive deep into the functionality of the GTOBase. I'm sure there are enough videos online on all the features in much more details. I'm just gonna show you how I work with GTOBase. I'm gonna show you some features that I think are very helpful. And all in all, I'm going to talk about how I approach this software and how I analyze my game with its help. Alright, here on top we have this view tab where you can actually go through some hands, through some spots. You can of course upload hands. It could be a single hand, it could be a whole session, where you can pretty quickly see your biggest EV mistakes. And finally, if you uploaded a database big enough, you can filter for a certain spot, and you can go over these spots in your play. And like here, I filtered for all the small blind versus big blind spots where the action is a raise call, meaning that I am in the small blind, the hero, and I am raising and my opponent calls. And you can filter for different parameters too. Could be stack sizes, could be this villain filter where you can select only regulars, meaning hands that I have played against people that I play or on a regular basis. In other words, versus regulars. And I also filtered for the smallest EV mistake, which is 0.1 or 10 BBs per 100. So all the hands where the mistake is lower will be filtered out. Well, actually the mistakes that are lower than 0.1 are not that important. And actually a mistake according to GTO is not necessarily a mistake in the real game, because our opponent can very well deviate from the optimal strategies in a way that our mistake is not actually a mistake. It could very well be that we are in fact exploiting him. Okay, so I filtered for all the mistakes that are minus 0.1 and higher, and of course we can also filter for the biggest mistakes first, but those biggest mistakes are usually just misclicks. So to not waste any time, I filtered for mistakes that are not very big, but are still mistakes according to GTO. Okay, here we raise 3 BBs in the small blind, and again I filtered for all the hands where I am in the small blind against a big blind. Villain flats 6-4 offsuit, quite a loose call actually, but okay. All in all, we started with a check on the 9-6 deuce board, and let's click view to take a look at the game tree. Okay, so we use a polarized betting strategy here because all those 9x hands in our range are actually very vulnerable. So we want more protection and we want to bet bigger. So yeah, with all those hands we want to value bet, we use a bigger sizing. And mostly our value betting range is those pretty strong but pretty vulnerable hands like 9x combos, and some decent backdoor hands like a Jack 10 offsuit, for example, or Jack 8 with a heart, or a gut shot, or Ace 3 with a heart, very interesting hand to bet in my opinion, and so on. Okay, why have I decided to check King 9? The thing is that we have two groups of slow plays, so to say. One are the hands that we are planning to check call. For example, if we check and he bets half pot, hands like pocket 9s, pocket 6s, pocket aces, and most of pocket kings, we are check calling, because those hands need less protection. And there are some 9x hands in our range that we are planning to check raise with some small frequency. If we bet all those 9 hands and we only slow play the monsters, so to say, like pocket 9s, pocket 6s, or maybe pocket aces, pocket kings, in the end we will have no hands for a check raising range. In other words, no value check raises at all. And if we have no check raising range, our opponent can bet very linearly. He can bet tons of 6x hands to deny equity, to get a value from our ace highs, king highs, and this is not good for us. And then he can easily check back turn. So yeah, I need a check raising range and I need a slow playing range. In other words, I need to protect my check calling range. I don't want to check call only with ace high, king high, and some 6x combos. So yeah, this is the reason why I decided to check king 9 here. And next our opponent checks back and we have a 10 of clubs on the turn. And here we have a very cool feature. I'm sure you are aware of this, but anyway, I'm gonna show you how it looks like. If you click right here, and then we see a list of all the possible flops, and we can sort them out by certain action. For example, if you want to see the boards where we bet 450 the most, or flops that we want to check more often, as we see those are monotone flops, or flops where we want to block bet almost 100%. And you can also filter for certain boards. Here on the left could be monotone boards, two-tone, rainbow boards, trip boards, paired boards, unpaired boards, straight boards, whatever. This one is very good if we want to see our strategy on certain boards, like for example how we should play paired boards, or how we should play straight boards, or all but straight boards, monotone boards maybe. We want to classify flops in our head in some ways. There are some types of boards where solvers play almost identically, with some minor changes maybe. There are some boards where we prefer big bets, boards where we prefer to check almost 100%, boards that we are block betting almost 100%, boards where we use two sizings a lot, like for example ace 9-8 with the flush draw. Since it's an ace high board, we still want to bet a lot and we want to use block bet sizing a lot to use our range advantage. But on the other hand, we also have some combos that we really want to bet big, that we want to pot bet, like most of our ace-x combos. But then again, since we have a huge range advantage, we want to bet a lot with our queens, with hands like king 8, king 9, and so on. And the rainbow version of this board, we also want to use block bet quite a lot, which is a 25% pot bet in this case. Okay, let's get back to our hand. 9-6 deuce, check check, 10 on the turn, and I make a clear mistake. I have no idea why I decided to block bet here. It's just pretty obvious that with the 10 on the turn we want to play a polarized betting strategy, and we clearly do not want to play a block bet. If it was a low card on the turn, like I don't know, 4 or 3, then of course I see the idea behind building a small betting range, a block betting range. Because then we have a lot of hands that we want to value bet thinly, and that we want to bet for protection. If our opponent checks back 9-6 deuce, he doesn't have a lot of 9x combos, and after calling a 3x raise pre-flop, he doesn't have a lot of 6s, deuces, and 3s. So yeah, we can easily small bet hands like ace-6, king-6, ace-king, ace-queen. All those hands require protection. And of course we would also mix some nut hands in this range, like 9s, 6s, aces maybe. But with the 10 of clubs on the turn, the board now is very dynamic, and for me to bet big with some 10x combo and make up our opponent fold a hand like, I don't know, a gut shot with an overcard, or like king jack, it's a big win for us. Also, there is a feature I really like in GTOBase, but it only works if you have Simple Postflop as well. I mean, the only downside of GTOBase is that we see a perfect GTO strategy. But what if we think that our opponent will not play according to GTO? Well, in this case, we can copy the ranges from GTOBase and paste them into Simple Postflop. Let's start from the turn, because the calculations will take no time at all. We have 6 BBs in the pot and 22 BBs left. And our flop is 9, oh no, not clubs, 9 deuce of hearts and 6 of clubs, and 10 of clubs on the turn. Okay, let's go over some settings here. No, let's make it. Yeah, let's make it like this. And let's probably go with one sizing for us, 4.5 BBs, the sizing that the program uses more frequently. And for our opponent, if we check, yeah, 4.5 is also the most used. Okay, next we need to copy ranges. Here, player out of position, player 2 is a small blind in our example. So we copy range for the small blind and we paste it in here. And then of course we also copy paste big blind's range in here. And now we calculate. As you see, it's all pretty quick, and now we can make some assumptions about how our opponent can deviate from optimal strategy. First of all, we can assume that he's not gonna slow play as much as he should in theory. So for example, with hands like King 10, Queen 10, Pocket Kings, Pocket Aces, he's going to bet 100%, which is quite a realistic assumption in my opinion. Okay, let's go through his top pair combos and assume that he bets all the good ones and only checks weaker ones, like 10-5, 10-4, 10-3. The rest he's betting. He also bets all of his overpairs. He doesn't have many combos of overpairs, but he has some. Considering the 9x combos, let's assume he bets, he checks those, he bets all of his ace 9 combos. I think it's a good assumption, considering that the opponent will often have some kind of a draw and not too often 10x combos. 8s, 7s, 6x combos, so let's assume he checks 100%. I think it's, again, a pretty realistic assumption. Deuce X also 100% check. Ace 8, Ace 7, I think he could definitely bet, because in this kind of a spot, small blind versus big blind, we don't expect to have too much showdown value with those hands. Yes, those hands still have some showdown value, but we hope for like deuce on the river, so we can check down and maybe win. So yeah, some showdown value, but not too much. But anyway, let's assume the average opponent will check ace-high combos. Next, let's assume he always bets all of his queen-jack combos and maybe all of his jack-7 combos. All the flush draws without showdown value, yeah, 100% bet, it's fine. And combo draws, let's also assume he bets 100%. Although there's a reason to check those to then play check raise. All the open-enders bet gut shots. Oh, Jack-7 is a good one. Let's assume he bets 100%, as I said before. And of course, all of this is very player dependent, but let's assume he bets 100% of his Jack-7 combos, not gut shot in the end. And let's assume King-Queen, King-Jack, he bets 50%. He could check those because of showdown value. Anyway, now we can see how we should exploit this type of strategy. By the way, we can anytime add more bet sizings if you want to. And yeah, now we have a pretty capped checking range for our opponent since he never checks his 10x combos. He also never slow plays aces or kings or other overpairs, and I think that the first adjustment we should go for is we should use a bigger bet sizing with our 10x combos, since now those have more equity. So yeah, I think our counter strategy is to increase bet sizing. Let's add probably 6BB or 6BB. Yeah, probably we won't use this one, maybe 8 BBs. And of course now we have no incentive to bet our 9x combos since our opponent checking range has tons of them. But again, it's a capped range and he has nothing stronger than 9x. Okay, let's see what happens when he bets 4.5. We want to take a look at the difference between fold equities. Okay, the difference is actually not that big. We fold 38% according to GTO, and now against this strategy we fold 43% of hands. So the difference is there, but it's not that big. And actually a lot depends on how he plays his king queen, king jack, king 8, king 7, queen 7 combos. I mean, how often he uses those as a bluff compared to how often he checks. If he bluffs those every time, then of course we have a huge incentive to call our 6x combos more. And if he checks all of those, then we want to mostly fold our 6x combos. Then we see the huge difference in our response to his check. According to GTO, we are supposed to check back 57% of hands, and we only use pot bet like a little bit. Now we pot bet 30%, we also overbet sometimes, and we check back a lot less. And yeah, with a hand like 10-8 we have 85% equity, so we can easily pot bet it or even overbet. With that in mind, we can also bluff more. We can see that king queen, king jack, queen jack combos we use as a bluff a lot. The thing is that we raised 3x on the small blind and there's a 9 and a 10 on the board. So with a hand like king jack we only have 32% equity. And there are not so many hands in his range that king jack actually beats. King 8, king 7, king 5. Some suited hands, queen x suited, jack x suited, 8-4 suited, 7-4 suited. Not so many combos, and there are 3 times less suited combos than offsuit combos. So yeah, king queen, king jack, queen jack are not so strong, and we can easily use those as a bluff. We can also use some zero equity hands since our opponent's range is capped. We also can value bet pretty thinly. For example, here we see that 9-4, 9-3 combos we only check without a flush draw. But here, in this case, we can happily bet both of those combos using pot bet actually. Those hands have a 78% equity, and in GTO case only a 74-75%. And this assuming that our opponent checks on the flop hands like king 9, queen 9 and jack 9, which is not a 100% thing. He could easily bet those. Well, if we assume that he never slow plays his 10x combos on the turn, maybe he also never slow plays his 9x combos on the flop. And of course, we can put a lot of pressure on our opponent. Let's see how he reacts to our pot bet. In the GTO version of things, he folds 54% to a pot bet, and he sometimes calls with his 6x combos. Here he also folds 54%, but to fold those 54% he has to call all of his 6x combos. His range is much weaker now. He can't afford folding 6x, he can't fold king jack. This is why we can easily bet all of our king queen combos, for example. Ace 8, ace 7 he calls sometimes, jack deuce of diamonds he calls. We see here that this is a 100% fold. We see here that call is a minor mistake, but here call is a necessity. He has to call those because his range is too weak and folding too much is not an option. And this tool is actually the one that I use very often when I'm working with GTOBase. I often copy turn or river ranges to a simple GTO, and then I make some assumptions. So like here, for example, I assume that on such a dynamic board, not many opponents will ever check hands like queen 10, king 10, jack 10. They almost always bet those hands because they're afraid of such a dynamic board. They're afraid that a bad card will roll off. They're afraid to miss some value. So this way I can make some calculations that will be much more practical and much more precise for a real game. We can also assume that he always checks his king queen, king jack combos, and we can take a look how it affects our strategy, our ranges. Oh, let's leave queen 7 combos in there, all of those. Yeah. I think that against such a strategy we have to fold all of our 6x combos, and yeah, this is actually true? Well, if he never bluffs king queen, king jack, he only check calls them, then we don't have to call any 6x combos. He just doesn't have enough bluffs. All those low gut shots, flush draws, those are not enough. And against the check, the strategy is pretty much the same. We still can value bet all of our 9x combos. We even have some incentive to bet our king 6 combos, although I would never bet those in practice. This is too much, but 9x combos, yeah. And as you can see, he even value shoves his king 9 combos, so we value bet so thinly that he can use his king 9 combos as a value protection shove. And we of course overfold against his bet, and on the contrary we can take a look what happens if he bets all of his potential bluffs. So he bluffs too much. Well, maybe he thinks that our range is capped and he can value bet a lot and he can also bluff a lot. What happens then? Let's see. Okay, now we call all the 6x combos, which is reasonable. We even call some ace-high combos, which I don't actually recommend to do in practice. But anyway, 6x combos were indifferent, now they are pretty positive. And if we assume that he also bets all of his king 9 combos, then now we fold most of the ace-high combos, but we of course call ace-8, ace-7, and we call all of the 6x and deuce-x combos. And in the cases like this one, we always have to think about double exploit. By the way, if we add a half-pot bet here, would we use it or not? Let's take a look. We add node, we add a bet 3.0, and we recalculate. The thing is that maybe now we have an incentive to bet our 6x combos for protection, and a little bit, yes. Well, yeah, we can bet hands like queen deuce, for example, here, and using half-pot sizing to get value from those hands. But yeah, in practice I would not recommend to use a couple sizings, I would just use one, which I think is enough here. We don't bet ace-8, ace-7 a lot. Let's take a look what happens here. Oh yeah, we don't bet much either, but we sometimes bet ace-5, ace-4, ace-8. The idea is that we can get calls from hands that we beat, like king, queen, king, jack, but in this case they are not in our opponent's range, so we can get value from those hands. So yeah, we have no incentive to use merged range and bet with our ace-high combos. And how to determine whether our opponent bets combos like king, queen, king, jack or not? Well, we have to pay close attention to the showdowns. This is basically the only thing that matters in this case. There are some people who will show down a lot. There are some people who would bluff a lot. For example, sometimes we see that a guy shows down a hand that he should never show down. I mean that he has some hand that he should 100% bluff on this street or previous streets, whatever. And if we see our opponent showing down a hand that he should definitely bluff, then we can assume that he loves to show down his hands, he doesn't really love bluffing, and with hands like king, queen, king, jack in this spot, he would most likely check and try to get to showdown. And in this case, this is basically the pivot point for us and our strategy, how our opponent plays his king, jack, king, queen combos and his 10x combos. And basically these two parameters determine our strategy. But anyway, we still should have a good idea of how GTO strategies look like. We should know value thresholds, bluff thresholds. But of course, in reality, I would not strictly follow GTO. I would prefer one of two strategies in this spot, for example. I would never play mixed strategies with some of our hands that are indifferent, like some ace-8, ace-7 combos, 6x combos, those king-jack hands. I would either call all of those or fold all of those. depending on how I think my opponent plays his 10x combos and his king queen king jack combos. If he bluffs a lot, I would call all of those. If he doesn't bluff enough, then I would fold all of those. And this is a very important tool in GTOBase. Sometimes we get the strategies that we can't realistically implement in the real game, but we still want to know why things work the way they do. Why, for example, should he bet all of his 10x combos? So we don't get in the spots like this where, for example, if we lock his betting strategy right here, I mean for the big blind, then the small blind counter strategy would be to check 100%, I assume, or maybe very close to 100, let's see. Yeah, it's actually 100% check. The idea is that big blind puts so much pressure on his opponent, he bets very thinly, he uses big sizings. So for the small blind, it is much better to check shove all of his good 10x combos. Because after betting he gets what, like 43% action, and if he checks he gets 60% action, much more. And yeah, he gets the same amount of action if we consider river as well. But if he checks shoves, he doesn't have to play river, he just ends the hand right here, which is better for him. So yeah, this is a clear mistake by me. I should either check or bet 3/4 pot with the idea of check call in river. Using block bet, I kept my range, I telegraph my hand to opponent. Well, yeah, all in all, this is a very poor decision. And it's impossible to balance blocking range. Betting 3/4 looks really fine. We get some value from his 6x combos, from combos like ace 8, ace 7. And I assume that pretty much on every river card except 9, we play check. Alright. I'm sorry. Okay, we can bet still e4 runs out on the river. The 4 is such a low card that we can still bet half pot with king 9. We still have 74% equity with this hand. Well, because some of his straights and 10x combos will just reshove against 3/4 on the turn. But if a queen runs out, then we of course check. And I think we should take a look at our river strategy as well, but of course we know that the smaller the river card, the more thinly we could value bet. If 4 runs out, we can easily value bet king 9, we can even value shove our queens, kings. And every time you see an action you would pretty much never use in the real game, you should ask yourself what's the opponent, what's the type of opponent you could actually use this play against. For example, here, what type of opponent you would check king 10 against? Well, it's the guy who bets really aggressively. If your opponent, when you check twice, thinks that your range is really capped and bets all of his king high bluffs or all of his queen high bluffs, maybe some 9x combos for value, then this is the guy you would prefer checking king 10 against on the turn. This way we can get a lot of additional value from him, especially if we know that he would never fold any 10x hand against our check shove. Or if we bet 3/4 on the turn, our opponent calls and we arrive on the river, we can see that we sometimes check pocket kings. And we look at this and we think, what the hell? What is the player that I would check kings against on this river? I mean, overbet shove with kings would be pretty obvious here, or even some mid-size bet. But the thing is, if we never check here with our kings, if we bet all of our potential value hands, then our checking range is some missed draws that we want to check fold, some king queens, king jacks, or maybe some 4x combos. So in this case, he could think about value betting hands like King 6. Or he can turn into a bluff hands like King Queen or King Jack. Or Queen Jack just to fold out chops. Because our range is so capped with not enough value, with not enough good hands. And yeah, even if you have some showdown value with hands like King Queen, there are some chances that our opponent bluffed with Ace 8, for example, or with 7-4, and now he has a pair of 4s. So yeah, the idea of checking aces and kings for the small blind on the turn is pretty simple. He doesn't want to allow his opponent to bet his 6x combos and to bluff too much. And yeah, let's go over this spot. We bet turn, we have 4 of spades on the river. And let's assume that we always bet our aces and kings on this river. Well, all of our overpairs, just for the sake of it. Okay, this is his default reaction to our check, and if we recalculate it, we see that now he can easily bet almost all of his 6x combos, Queen 6, King 6, Jack 6. He can easily bluff King Jack, Queen Jack, he can even sometimes bluff King Queen. And we are in the really bad spot with our 4x and ace high combos. But then again, we can ask ourselves how often our opponents will bet 6x combos on the river or some weak 9x combos. Well, I think almost never. So we actually don't have to slow play aces or kings. But now we know the reason why we shouldn't actually slow play aces or kings. We know that our opponent would pretty much never value bet his 6x combos on the river in the real game. So we don't have to use those slow plays because we don't need to balance our checking range in that way. And if we assume, for example, again, if we assume that our opponent never bets his King Queen King Jack combos, if we assume that he checks 100% of those, if we assume also that he never value bets a6, so he always checks those, he never value bets low 9s, 9-5, 9-3s, he always checks. He never bluffs his king high combos at all. He only bluffs queen jack and weaker. Then we don't slow play kings anymore. We still slow play aces, but aces block a lot of stuff. But anyway, we see that there's no difference in EV between shoving and checking aces, so yeah, if you want to, you can still shove them. But anyhow, the main point here is that if you know that our opponent never bluffs king highs, he only bluffs queen jack and lower, and he never value bets 6x, then we can actually check fold almost our entire range. You check fold all the 4s, you check fold all the ace high combos, and it's totally fine. So you never slow play, you shove all the decent combos, and you always check fold after checking. And obviously, if we follow this strategy, our opponent can easily bluff all of his king queen, king jack combos. Bluffing is now 4 times better than checking, as we see in EVs. And of course, this is because we fold 94% of our combos. And for me personally, I would never slow play aces in a spot like this, because I don't think that my opponent will bluff his king high combos. And I also don't think that he will value bet thinly. And then again, if he never bluffs king queen king jack, then I would simply check fold 100% after checking. So yeah, you should think about your betting strategy and about your reaction to his bet after your check, because in fact you will exploit him in both spots. And for example, if you know that your opponent never slow plays in a spot like this, and you have a hand like king queen, which is a check according to GTO, let's see just to make sure. Yeah, it's a 100% check. And then you can easily bluff this hand if your opponent never checks on the river with aces and kings, and never calls a hand like 7-4. And again, you can easily value bet hands like a6 or king 6, because there's nothing for you to fear in this spot. if your opponent never slow plays. We see here that King 6 has 91% equity, so yeah, easy value bet. And you can easily bluff tons of other hands, because if your opponent never calls, then your bluffs make tons of money. So yeah, first hand, clear mistake by me, and I hope that you get an idea of how I work through hands here in GTOBase. Next, Jack 3 suited, 14 BBs effective, and we only min raise with this hand with these stacks. Villain calls, and I have no idea why I decided to check on this board 887 rainbow. First of all, my hand is very good for betting, and second, those paired boards are the ones that we want to bet 100%. Okay, let's go through some paired boards where we want to use a check-in range, a big check-in range, playing from small blind in the spot. Okay, mostly these are the boards with 2 sixes or just 2 low cards, where we check a lot. So yeah, it seems that after min raising small blind, we don't have a lot of 6x combos. Yeah, a lot of offsuit 6s we fold or we open limp. So yeah, paired boards with the high pair are very good for us since we have all those high cards, and paired boards with 6 are not good for us because we don't have enough 6s, and our opponent basically has all of them. And also he has a lot of 5s, so boards with 2 5s are also not as good for us. So yeah, if you go with 7 6 6, we actually check a lot, because we lack 6x combos, and in terms of trips, our opponent's way ahead. He has pretty much all the offsuit 6s from 6-4 to King 6. I think King 6 is a call. Well, it's a mix between calling and shoving. So yeah, we conclude that we definitely want to bet a lot or even everything on the paired boards with a high pair, like 2 queens, 2 kings, and so on. And we really don't like paired boards with low pair, especially with 2 6s or 2 5s. These are the boards where we check a lot. And 6-3-3 is an awful board for us since we don't have 6s, we don't have 3s, and our opponent has all of those. So yeah, on this board our opponent is miles ahead. And yeah, even in overpairs I am not ahead because he is going to slow play a lot of them with 14 BBs effective. And yeah, as a result, I check 44% on this board because besides pocket pairs, I really don't have anything on this board. No 3s, no 6s. And if we decide to block bet, our opponent can float a lot. Take a look, he's not folding anything at all. He can call his king high combos, he can call his queen high combos. He has a huge raising range, because again, he has all those trays, we don't. So yeah, he has a lot of hands, he wants to raise here, he's not going to fold much, so there is no reason for us to bet 100% on a board like this. And again, if you want to know what to do, how to counter a player who uses 100% bet on this board, we just copy ranges and we go to a simple postflop. First we go through the settings, 4 BB in the pot, 11 BBs left in stacks. Board is 6-3-3 with a flush draw. And then we only leave one option for our opponent, which is a block bet, and we assume that he block bets 100%. Yeah, we remove check option and he's only left with small bet. So he has to use it 100%. And for his opponent, let's add a shoving range, of course, and a small, really small raise, basically a mean raise, a little bigger. And yeah, we now copy ranges from the flop here. Small blind range first, we paste it right over here. And just like that. And big blinds range, which we paste right here. I go with the low quality of calculation. We don't need a very precise solution. We just want to get the overall idea. We don't want to dig really deep. Okay, it freezes for some reason. Okay, it seems that we have some problems with server. Well, of course, it just has to happen when I record the video, but okay, let's move on. But I hope you get the idea. We emulate this situation in Simple Postflop with small blind betting everything, and then we see the reaction from the big blind if small blind bets 100%. And I assume that the program will raise a lot against a 100% bet, and we will put many hands in his range, like king high hands, hands like, I don't know, queen 10, in a very difficult spot. If we raise here as a big blind up to, I don't know, 30%, it's gonna be really tough to play as a small blind since you just don't have enough hands to counter it in any way. Well, you have to, I don't know, 3-bet as a bluff a lot. You have to find a way to defend against the raise, and it's not easy to do. So yeah, we can make a small blind's life pretty miserable. Oh, and it's back online. Very good. So let's continue. What about reshove? Does he have a reshove in range here? No, he doesn't. But I think it's fine. But okay, let's go without it. Okay, next hand, hand number 3, and again, in hand number 2, my mistake is my decision to check. I messed up a little bit. I know that I have to check a lot on 8-7-7 board, but I confused it with 7-8-8. I had to bet my hand. We have to check a lot on these small pair boards like 7-3-3, 6-3-3, 5-deuce-deuce, and so on. We just can't bet 100% on those boards. But on boards like Queen-Queen-Deuce, or, well, let's try King-Jack-Jack, for example, we bet pretty much 100%. This is a great board. We have kings, we have jacks, and if you go with King-King-Jack, this one should be even better. So yeah, those high paired boards we can see bet a lot easily, because we have a big advantage in high pair department. And we don't have garbage hands like 9-5 offsuit, which our opponent has. But if the paired board is quite low, with 2 6s for example, or 2 5s, we have to construct a checking range. We just can't ignore it. By the way, what about ace 6-6 board? Okay, we bet everything here because our opponent lacks ace-high combos. Ace is a very good card for us, but if we change ace to a king, maybe? Okay, 31% checking range because our opponent has some king access. And if it's queen 6-6, 65% check. Because our opponent has tons of queen access, pretty much every queen x combo. And of course a lot of 6-axes, and don't forget that there's a flush draw on the board. So yeah, not a typical high checking range. And this is the approach I recommend to you. You look for your mistakes, then you think what I did wrong, in which case my mistake is not a mistake actually, in which case my play is good. What are the conditions that affect it? And here, for example, checking Jack 3 suited is not a mistake, because we want to pot control with a lot of hands, and Jack 3 we want to check a lot. But it's still a bet on 7-8-8, and of course I don't really want to check fold it, this hand here, and I have to check fold it if I check. If our opponent uses medium sizing against a block bet, I would check call it. Okay, 2.5x raise, call. Flop is Jack 9-4 rainbow. Okay, check is our main option with pocket ace on this board, and when you have a situation like this, when you want to check mostly, but you still have to bet sometimes, well, you have to think, when do I actually want to bet? I mean, some people think that they have to check it every time, anywhere in this case. But we want to think, when do we want to check this 100% of the time, against which opponent, and against which opponent do we actually want to bet this hand 100% of the time. Because if we never use an option that solver actually uses sometimes, we have to think when this option is really good. What is the opponent we want to use it against? Well, solver went through millions of different strategies, and there are some strategies, obviously, against which betting 8s is good. And this is not some crazy strategy like our opponent always calls 10 deuce offsuit. No, this is some reasonable strategy against which betting with 8s is fine. And if you see that solver often uses an option that you would never use in the real game, then you should probably go through this option, you have to think about it, and you have to figure it out. Why is this used at all? Why is it good, when I have to even consider it? First thing I want to mention is that after raising 2.5x, our opponent does not have a lot of jack-x hands. No offsuit jack-6 and lower. So 8's equity is not as low as on maybe king 9-4 board. Here on king 9-4, 8 has 53% equity, and jack 9-4, don't remember, rainbow or flush draw, anyway, 58%. Now let's see what happens if we block on the flop our opponent calls, and for example 5 of clubs rolls off on the turn, and we check our 8s. Well, in this case, if our opponent bets half pot and we don't have pocket 8s, 7s and 6s, we just don't have hands that we can check call against it. And yeah, if we check those middle hands like pocket 8s, pocket 7s, we also check hands like ace king, ace queen. So as a result, if we check all those hands on the flop and we bet flop instead and then check turn, we just don't have enough hands to call and we will overfold. Here we only fold 39% because we have those 8-7s. We also have 4x combos and we also have ace king, ace queen that we want to check call. So yeah, we bet sometimes with those middle hands on the flop with the idea of check call in turn or small bet again, but this idea is kind of stupid actually. But then again, if you have enough time, I can find reasons to block bet on the turn again with those hands. And yeah, I don't know if you can actually implement this strategy in practice with betting 8s sometimes on the flop. I don't know how much EV we can gain with it, but I sure see some strategies that will crush us if we never bet 8s or ace king or 4x on the flop. First of all, if we never bet those hands, our opponent can float wider. For example, he can float with hands like king 16, 5. And then if we check, our opponent has a more polarized range. And for example, he can even block bet, and against his block bet, we just don't have those hands anymore that we would like to check call. So yeah, he can float wider, he can bet third pot against our check on the turn, and instead of 25% fold equity, he will generate 30 or 33% fold equity. Or he can use a standard half pot bet, and again, without those 8s, 7s, ace king, ace queen, we will overfold. So yeah, the main idea of betting those middle hands on the flop is to have hands that we can check call on the turn. If we only bet our jack-x, our 9x combos, our bluffs, our draws, then after checking on turn, and even if we slow play sometimes, we check with some nut hands. Even if we also check sometimes with hands with pairs that we hit on the turn, we still won't have enough hands to check call. And we mostly will have in our checking range hands that we are going to give up with. And he can attack us a lot using small sizing. So to avoid overfolding on the turn, we bet those hands on the flop that we eventually will use as bluff catchers. And this is basically solver's logic behind all of this. So yeah, whether you want to check all of your 8s or whether you want to bet some of those, it's up to you to decide. An example of an opponent against whom I would prefer to bet all of my 8s is a guy who has a transparent sizing on the turn, who bets bigger with his value hands and smaller with his bluffs. And also if all of his floats, all of his hands like All of his 7 sixes, queen eights, 10 eights that he floated on the flop. He bets on the turn using like 3 BBs as a sizing, thinking that my range is capped. So he floats white and then very aggressively bets against a check, using a small sizing. Well, against this guy I would definitely prefer to bet all of my eights on the flop. Because he really overbluffs the turn. He doesn't have enough thin value bets, and he has a lot of bluffs. So yeah, obviously against this guy I would prefer to bet and to check call on turn. Especially if he overfloats the flop. For example, if I bet small and he calls hands like 8-3 with the backdoor flush draw, or queen 6, queen 5 offsuit. So yeah, this is the perfect guy to bet all of eights against on the flop and then check call on turn, because he will overbluff massively. And which opponent I would prefer to check all of my eights against? Well, a guy who checks back a lot on turns. Or against a guy who is betting a turn quite thinly. Like for example, he bets all of his 9x combos for value. Well, against this guy I definitely don't want to bet flop with 8s and then check fold all the time on turn. I would prefer slow playing against him more with my jack-x combos, for example. Also my aces kings I would prefer to check if he value bets really thinly. And there's no point in betting 8s against him. This will just put me in the bet spot. And against a guy who checks back a lot on turn, who pot controls a lot, who never bets his gut shots, hands like 10-8, and prefers to bluff river instead. Again, this is the type of player I don't really see a reason to bet against with my 8s. Well, of course, I still get some value betting my 8s on the flop, but if he uses a really polarized range, I don't even know if I can check call them, right? If he never bluffs 10-8, if he never turns his king-high combos into bluff. Again, versus a guy like this, I should probably check 100% of my 8s on the flop. And this is a very useful exercise as well, in my opinion. If you see an option that you never use, like you prefer betting one hand and you see some checking with it, you should really think against which opponent you would prefer checking it sometimes or maybe always. And yeah, we would probably never mix this hand 60-40. We would either bet all of those or check all of those. Although against some opponents I would actually randomize it. Okay, this one finally calculated, so we can get back to it. Okay, against a guy who bets 100%, we only fold 4% of hands, so we basically defend everything. And I was wrong actually, I thought we would raise some more, but we are pretty much raising the same amount. Although I get why we do not want to raise very often, because when we raise we get 24% 3-bet. And for example, he 3-bets even hands like ace-queen of spades, and I assume that he calls it against a shove. Yeah. Also he 3-bets queen 9, king 8, and then calls a shove, so yeah. So yeah, even betting 100%, he still plays very aggressively against a raise, so this is why we do not raise as often, we prefer to call much more. And again, on 6-3-3, since our opponent has pretty much nothing on this board, we can float really wide, we can float hands like 10 for offsuit. Because again, our opponent's range is not that strong, he bets 100%, and we can call and realize our positional advantage. And this is why betting everything is a mistake here. But if you think that our opponent is not going to call as white as here and he's not gonna raise more, I still think that against some people raising more against a wider range is a good option. Well, because I don't think that people would 3-bet king 8 and call a shove. Right. So yeah, against a guy like that, you can still bet 100%. It's easier to play that way. It's fine still, but you have to keep in mind that you are exploitable, and he can adjust and make your life miserable. Okay, so I check the flop with my 8s. He checks back, and I hit a set on the turn. A set is a great hand to slow play, so that's what I do. We are not actually blocking our opponent's value range, and we need to protect our checking range. So yeah, pocket eights is an amazing hand to slow play. And again, if we never slow play eights, our opponent can easily bet all of his 9x combos, and that could be a problem for us. Yeah, if he bets half pot on the turn to deny equity to get some value from our 8x hands, we need some slow plays as well. By the way, it's interesting that with pocket eights we never check shove or check raise against a bet, we just check call. Well, to be honest, I'd prefer a check shoving this hand in a real game, and we see that EV difference between shoving and calling is not that big. But then again, we have to think why do we ever call this hand? Why do we have to call according to the solver? And yeah, the idea of this exercise is not to go through as many hands as we can, but to go through maybe one or two hands, but very thoroughly. And I actually do that a lot, like really a lot. I work with Simple Postflop all the time. And this feature of copy-pasting ranges is just amazing. I just can't imagine my work without it. Yeah, this way the analysis becomes really effective, really helpful. Okay, here's our board, Jack 9 for 8 different suits, and now we have to input stacks and pot size. Okay. Okay, here in this model I have tons of different sizings calculated, but I don't need them. I don't need all of them, that's for sure. And now we copy ranges for small blind first, guy out of position, and then the big blind guy in position. Okay, let's now assume that against an optimal range from our opponent, we will shove all of our aces and kings and all of our sets. So, I mean, all of our slow plays, strong hands that we check on the turn. The board is very dynamic, so we don't want to slow play aces, kings. We would slow play straight, but not over pairs or sets. What is the problem with this strategy? What's gonna happen to us? Okay, all the sets, all the aces, we shove, check shove. I think a lot of players will use this exact strategy of check shoving every combo of aces, of eights, and all the sets. Okay, so now we check shove 9% of hands, and our check calling range is, of course, pretty capped. Yeah, also we shove kings. What else? What else? Yeah, all the two pair combos as well. And now we calculate it. Okay, first the betting range. Okay, what do we see here? Well, actually betting strategy is pretty much the same. So despite us check shoving all those hands, we see that betting range did not change for our opponent. So I think the biggest problem for us after we take this line is our value betting range on the river. Because if we check call on the turn, our opponent knows that we have nothing. We have some 8x, 9x combos, but nothing really strong. And we see that a hand like 9-2, for example, can easily value bet on blank river for our opponent. But in this case, with optimal strategy, if we check call on the turn and we have this blank deuce, let's say, on the river, and we of course check, then our opponent checks back with hands like 9-7. Well, let's change deuce to 3, as it was in the example. Still 9-7, 9-5, 9-6, all checkbacks. Turn 9 is where he starts to bet. 9-7 has 74% equity, and in our example, wow, 86%. So yeah, the fact that small blind never check calls any slow plays, he only check shoves, sets, and overpairs, is punished by very thin value bets on the river. And of course, with this, he can also bluff much more. So yeah, if your opponent never check calls pocket eights, never check calls pocket aces, he only checks shove those on the turn, then you can easily value bet hands like 9-7 and 9-5 on a blank river. And yeah, if there's a queen on the river, we cannot value bet those hands anymore. And let's see, if ace comes on the river, not a very good card for us, we can still value bet hands like 9-3, 9 deuce. And here, if we have an ace on the river, wait a second. Even queen 9 we do not bet every time. So even queen 9 is a borderline hand, borderline value bet. But here any 9x combo is an easy value bet. And of course here we bluff a lot, we bluff a ton. And not so much here, of course. Here we give up around 67% of the time, here 50%. And again, any 9 is an easy value bet. And this is how I think you should work with hand histories. What if this? What if that? What if he plays like this? What if he never bets this? And so on. People do not make some pretty obvious and stupid mistakes anymore, but they still c-bet 100% on boards like 6-3-3. Or they never check call a strong hand on boards like Jack 9-8 because the board is very dynamic. And those types of mistakes happen pretty often, I think. So yeah, you should know how to exploit it. And again, if you think that your opponent would pretty much never value bet thinly on a river, he would never value bet hands like 9-5, 9-7, and he would never have a white bluffing range on the river, then you can probably always check shove your eights. And it's not necessary to slow play it at all. You want to stack his Jack-X combos right now, you want to stack his 9x combos, maybe some good 9x combos right now, you want to fold out some 10x combos. So yeah, against some players you have to slow play 8s and strong hands sometimes on the turn. Against some people you don't have to slow play at all. And you should realize why you never slow play. And keep in mind that your strategy is actually exploitable. So if your opponent finds some thin value bets on the river, then you should start slow playing strong hands on the turn. And if you know that your opponent never check calls ace or aces in the spot, then you yourself should start value betting thinly on the river and bluff more. Yeah, even if ace comes on the river, we still value bet any 9. And what about king? Do we still value bet any 9 on the king river? Let's see. Okay, here we think that we still value bet 9x combos because, oh no. We see that when king comes on the river, we don't value bet as thinly. We don't value bet any 9x hand anymore, because king actually improves a lot of hands. So we value bet king x plus. 9s, jacks, we check. Oh, here we can't even value bet pocket aces. We can't value bet king x combos. Even some 2-pair combos we check. Well, yeah, king is a very scary card. King 10, king queen improved, king 8, king 7 improved. And yeah, he still has all those sets. So yeah, it's even questionable if we can extract more value with hands like king 5. after we bet half pot on the turn. King 8, King 9 are very common hands. King 10, King Queen, some straights. Yeah, even here King X is a borderline value bet, so in a GTO solution it's of course it's not a value bet. And yeah, here we bet 8-4, but in GTO version we pretty much always check. Yeah, we just not always, but we check a lot. So it's not a clear value bet, and we definitely can't value shove with this hand. Yeah, two's high, one pairs most default, and there's a lot of sets, two pairs, so enough combos to easily call, easily defend on the river. 60% of his range is two pair combos, 10-11% straights and sets. So yeah, a quarter of his range is two pair plus. Plus 13% of hands are top pair, so more than a third of his range is top pair plus. So yeah, a pretty strong range. Okay, that would be it for today. I hope this video was informative and helpful to you. And thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.